obscure world of parking. We use it every day, but have we really capitalized on the intricacies of our industry? In this podcast, the Parking Network will go behind the scenes and talk to industry professionals about all things parking, from the horizon of evolving technology and even stories of the old days. We hope to encourage and inspire operators and property managers alike to look at parking through a new lens.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Our Parking Industry Podcast. Today, Clyde Wilson and I'm Krista Olien will be talking through our Barnacle conversation with Colin Heffron Jr. And we had a great conversation talking about enforcement, what that looks like going forward, the future of customer-centric enforcement, and how it impacts the parking industry and parkers that are behaving badly. So today, we're going to chat through some of our takeaways from that episode and talk about some of the things TPN sees for enforcement and the need for enforcement, and kind of the impact that has on the industry and what was originally a customer service only industry, how that is kind of changing and adapting to be a little bit more than that and how we can do that appropriately. So, Clyde, do you want to kick us off with some commentary?
Yes, it's exciting I thought it was very exciting to have the podcast with Barnacle, because it's one of those, one of our customers uses Barnacle, and so we know a little bit about it. But it's also one of those moves in our industry that you just mentioned about changing our industry a little bit and moving away from this type of enforcement that we've had over the years that I believe has given us a part of the bad reputation that we really don't deserve. So a lot of the reason, there are a couple of good reasons that people don't like parking, and one of them is I can't find a parking place. And the other one is I get a ticket and I didn't deserve the ticket and I couldn't get it solved. And, everybody's mad about that. And so these are things that we as an industry can improve. And Barnacle takes a big step in our opinion and looking at them toward helping with one of those things that gives our industry a bad reputation. So I was excited to hear more about it. And I think what I was most excited about was Colin and his attitude toward the industry. Wonderful young guy that really had a great attitude. And I think he mentioned his dad a lot, so he got it from his dad, and which is great for our industry. They understand their role, and they really understand moving forward and what their role in the industry is. So that's my take. It was exciting. Yeah. It was exciting podcast to listen to.
Yeah, one thing that is a little interesting is that people in the parking industry always seem to come from somewhere else. So they see something that they have experienced, sometimes through personal experience, that they want to change, or maybe they feel like they can have an impact on it. And I think that's true for the Barnacle story as well. I don't think Colin Heffron Jr.'s dad was set out to change parking, whenever he was in high school or in elementary school. He wasn't saying, I want to work in the parking industry. And so it's interesting to see how those kinds of things, whenever someone faces a challenge, they internally decide, I either just get over it, or is there something I can do to change that? And I think Colin Heffron Sr. asked that question, and then that's why Barnacle was born. So he experienced some parking pain points and then kind of went with that and created something. So that's always that innovator mindset that we love here at the Parking Network. So that was one of my big takeaways too, is that the path to getting into this industry is always so interesting.
It is, it's changing. Through the first 30 years that I was in this industry was truly an accident that you ended up in the parking industry. And that because of technology, it's changing because it's become one of the technology challenges of today's time. So we have people coming into it that are coming into it because of what they perceive are the technology challenges of the industry. So we do have people actually now, it's really funny to sit back after 30, 35 years of nobody came here except it was just by accident. Mainly it was because you didn't have a job and somebody in the parking industry offered you one and you thought, well, I can do this for a little while I do something else. And then 30 years later, you're still here. But it's interesting now to see people who actually want to be in the parking industry. It's terribly interesting, and it's certainly fun. So, Colin's dad certainly really got here by that innovator mentality and found something that needed assistance. So he didn't come here by accident. He really came here with a purpose, and that's great for us in the parking industry to have people like that come into our business.
Absolutely. One of the pieces that I love about Barnacle's approach, I mentioned this in the beginning, is that they take a very customer-centric approach. So they look at what is the least complicated method that we can enforce this parking rule.
Right.
So they try to do things where it is not overwhelming for the customer to overcome the obstacle that Barnacle is designed to be. So
Right.
by having the ability to remove it themselves, the parker, having the ability to drop it off somewhere else, just all the different features and technology that they have incorporated, GPS, that they've incorporated into their device, that it's not just parking enforcement, it's more than that. And what exactly it is, I think the future will tell us that. But the idea that it is not just focused on enforcing parking, it's focused on how can we take technology to influence and benefit our parking enforcement tool that we have already developed? So how can we change it? How can it adapt? How can it grow? How can it mature?
Yeah, I think that's the exciting thing about listening to their podcast. And the exciting thing about them is they understand their role in the industry, and they understand that they're only just beginning. They'll continue to move forward with this technology, and they will not be stagnant on how their product interacts with the customers. So it's certainly exciting to see a company like this come into our industry.
Yeah. So what other, just thinking about the concept of technology and how technology is changing the parking industry as a whole, Clyde, do you have any observations or things that you've seen recently that are new technologies that are really coming in and impacting the parking industry that you think will have long-term change results from utilizing them in our industry?
Well, this is probably a subject or question you should never ask me, because you might get my answer. It's one of those subjects that I think about a lot, and I think I've watched this very closely now over the last 10 years, and I'm not sure that my opinion is correct, but you and I have talked a lot about product development. And we've written a couple of articles over the last 4 or 5 years about product development. Writing those articles was interesting because it forced me to sit down and think through some of the questions I had about the technology that was coming into the industry. And once you understand product development, you kind of get a little easier on the new products that are coming along, because you kind of understand they're really just going through this very standard product development. And when you look back over time, you'll see the greatest products, industries, technologies that we have today went through all this.
Mm-hmm. Why, just as a mom, I always think about it as the infant phase. So whenever we talk about Moore's Law, it's like,
Yes.
Most of these technologies are in their infant phase. And so you can't expect them to be reading or, working to pay for their own bills at that phase, but they're here, they're learning, they're developing, they're adapting, all of those things. And so I think that is just a little analogy that I like to keep in my brain. But Moore's Law is what Clyde is referring to as far as the development phase. So that he can probably explain that way better than I can.
Well, I'll do a quick run at it, but the first thing is, it's one of the things that I've learned, that the survivors of this are like the things that you mentioned about Barnacle earlier. They understand, they came into this as an innovator of, I think I can solve this problem. And now they've developed a product to solve it. And their attitude is, we're constantly getting better at this.
Uh-huh.
The survivors of the technology world that we live in today were the ones that did that. And the other ones come in and try to pretend they're innovators, but they're really not. They're just copying another input product over here, and they don't know how to take it to the next level and the next. So to us, as the parking network, as TPN Consulting, we have to look at it as we look at new products out there and people ask us about them. It's really funny how it comes back to a couple of little key points that when you find that in these new products, they're going to move forward. So that innovator start, that innovator mentality, that we're constantly got to get better and we've got to move forward. So that's what happens with, the Moore's Law that we're talking about as we were trying to understand product development. And Moore's Law was created in 1960s at a time when I don't remember the guy's name now, you may, Krista, created this understanding that on a chip, you could double the amount of data on a chip every 2 years. Well, when you start looking at doubling and what happens with doubling since 1967 or so, double that.
Yeah.
Because the data becomes tremendous as you get to where we are today. And then what's happened is not only does the amount of data get tremendous, it's now shrunk. It's not 2 years anymore. It's now a matter of months that the information out there will change. And then with AI coming, it's a phenomenal pace that we're into. So we need those innovator types sitting behind the scenes in the parking industry, because they're the ones that will keep us with the ability to serve our customers as we move forward. So it's having been in this industry a long time, 45 years, it's a terribly interesting time to see it, but there's a lot left to do. We're just in the early stages of this.
Yeah, and I think the innovator mindset, or this idea of the development phase, cannot stop at technologies. I think it applies to operations and the way parking companies are operating and managing facilities, and how they're going to take that innovator mindset and implement it into the job that they're already doing. So it's not just about a physical, tangible piece of technology in your hand. I think that mindset can be applied across the board, no matter what your role is. If you take that approach of always trying to be better or always trying to reach the next goal, it will only improve the product or the service that you are offering to your customers and clients. Another piece that comes to mind whenever you're talking about that is we cannot operate in a bubble. So if we're thinking about, I'll use Barnacle as my example. If you're thinking about Barnacle, their role is parking enforcement. They could ignore the parking industry. Honestly, they could ignore the industry as a whole, and they could focus on enforcement, not parking enforcement, but they could just focus their next innovative steps on enforcement only. But they have not done that. They've taken the idea of parking and they've incorporated it into their role of enforcement in the industry. So from talking to Colin, it was that parking comes first, the industry of parking comes first, and then their role as an enforcement company branching off of that comes next. And so they take an interest in going to the conventions and participating in the organizations and meeting their customers on site to see the parking facilities and what the problems are and get their boots on the ground. So I think not operating in a bubble, because they easily could do that. They could sit in their offices and just look at technologies and be like, oh, that'd be cool to add, send it to the factory, and, it wouldn't, maybe it sticks, maybe it doesn't, but they're taking an influential approach and looking at what the needs are and then developing the technology that goes along with that and taking those two parallels and making them converge.
Very interesting. I think there are so many things, in our role in the industry. We have to look at all the different products that are out there, but we also have to look at operations. And I think one of the challenging things that we see is the lag time behind the technologies that are trying to creep into our industry, and then the lag time behind the people who use those in their business every day. It's a long time between the new technology coming in and the people in the field learning how it fits into my business. Because, all the different parking companies out there are different. The university, the airport, the hospital, all have interact with technology in different ways. And so it's interesting how all of this kind of works together. But it's terribly interesting to see another company, and there have been several over time, that have come into our industry and understand their role with developing this product, not staying inside their bubble, understanding they develop a product over here for this bigger industry over here, and there may be several different types of uses for it throughout the industry. Terribly interesting. Interesting just discussion about an industry, our industry, and how it moves forward. And especially now, because there are so many different things out there impacting where we're going to be. I don't think I have a clue where we're going to be 10 years from now. Can kind of understand 5 years, but 10 years from now, I don't know. We get the discussion of autonomous vehicles and the discussion of EV, and you can see EVs going through another change and what's going to happen with that. It's one of the things that we learned, and I think this applies really across the board. EV has been certainly interesting because the government got into it, and the government starts making mandates. And I learned as I started looking at that, trying to figure out, okay, what does this do to us? Where are we going? People are asking me about it all the time. I have to get good answers. And all of a sudden you realize if the government's in it and they create these mandates, development stops because the manufacturers out there have to hit a target.
Mm-hmm.
And
that they didn't set.
You're right, that they didn't set. So they don't get to sit here behind the scenes and go, how do I make this better? What is it really going? And they don't get to do that. So the greatest thing, I've said in the past, I've had 2 electric cars. I'm not against them. I'm actually very much for them. But they've been a great teaching tool to me of understanding the development process and understanding what happens when the government gets in and does mandates. I was just talking to Barbara Chance and John Van Horn the other day, and we kind of got off on the subject. And because Barbara was talking about trains and transportation models, and I said, if you look back, people forget this. If you look back, the train industry was created by individuals. The government never started trains. That was all done by a bunch of people who needed to move goods and services across a very big empty country, and they had to do that, and they developed it. So it was totally private enterprise that developed the train system that we have today. And then automobiles. Well, the government wasn't doing it. Henry Ford did it, and a lot of other individuals created the automobile. So, and then planes. The Wright brothers weren't working for the government. They were working for themselves, trying to figure out how to get an airplane off the ground. So all of the types of transportation that we have were created by private industry. And so it's getting the government out of EVs will probably at some point be, obviously, gasoline-powered cars are going away. We're moving to something else. What that's going to be, I don't know. Is it hydrogen? Is it EV? Is it electric? Or is it something else? We'll only get there to the right place to carry us the next 100 years if we get the government out of it. And I think we've made a big move now to be able to do that. And we're going to see this tremendous amount of development now to get us to the next level.
I think just thinking about EVs and kind of the purpose behind each of their goals that they've set. So the car industry, they're the ones who started this concept of electric vehicles, but then it kind of got overshadowed by the government implementing things into this idea that was already kind of started. But the goals of each of them were different. The goals of the automobile industry were to develop a different kind of automobile to service their customers in a different way that want a different type of fuel source, and whatever the customer's reasoning is, they were able to supply the product and meet the need of their customers.
Right.
The purpose of the government to want to influence the higher usage of EVs is a different goal. It is not a customer goal. It is a governmental, save the environment type of goal. So the goals are different. While maybe they both have reasonable need, they are different. And so the path to get to those, if one is influencing the other, like you said, it's going to impact the development phase to meet the customer need. It's going to impact it and kind of divert its path a little bit, because the reason for the mandates is different than the reason than the original path or trajectory it was headed on.
Very, very, very true. And that's how you get to the future. You don't get to the future with government mandates. You get to the future with the people who can innovate as they move forward and then change the path to where they're really looking at, well, this doesn't really serve our customers well. Let's make this move and this move. And that gets us to, the not much over 100 years. We've moved from a horse and carriage to what we have today. And when you look at the timeline of development, that's amazing. It's the same thing that I was at the 100th anniversary of aviation at Kitty Hawk. Well, and I'm sitting there, and I was standing beside Neil Armstrong. I have the picture of me standing beside Neil Armstrong. And I'm looking at this going, let me see, 1903, the Wright brothers flew wood and cloth airplane for 120 feet. And that started a process that in just 66 years later, this guy was standing on the moon. Mm-hmm. How do you go from that to this 66 years? Because we had a horse-drawn carriage for 3,000 years. And so you have to open up your mind a little bit to realize we are at a different time. Technology is changing things much faster than we as humans are used to that change happening. So we have to, in our role in the consulting business, we have to be sure we keep that in mind, that we're moving toward companies that can keep up with that kind of pace, because our industry is going to change again.
Yeah. So
it's interesting. It's interesting for me to see us talking about these things where you interview a company like Barnacle and you realize the bigger implications that little company has behind the scenes of what it's really telling us about change and the future and where as an industry we're headed, but really how we're going to get there. So
how does the technology, I know you with Flow Through and Focus Point, you were really focused on taking the people out of the garages. And that was a really kind of controversial concept whenever it first got brought to the forefront. So how does the technology of these new innovative ideas, and maybe like Barnacle, how the customer, the parker, can release the barnacle themselves and not necessarily have someone come over and take it off for them like a traditional boot or other enforcement tools. How does that keep our customer service concept at the forefront if people are not involved? Is technology going to be to a point where it can provide adequate customer service to the parkers? Because the parkers are not going to go away. It's going to be the technology that's going to make the employees or the people that work in the industry take on a different role that's not as customer facing.
That is absolutely a great question. And it's certainly one that 15 years ago when I was developing Focus Point that I had to think through, was I doing the right thing? And so I've also spent a lot of time in the last 15 years looking at that. So there's two pieces. And so at the end of this, and you have to remind me to tell the story at the end, I'll tell a little quick story at the end of this. The thing that I've realized is when you're moving forward to develop people, or when you're moving forward to eliminate hands-on people, it's easy for me to say this, but I've also watched it. So I'm not just saying this. Those people move on to a bigger role in their life because you're taking them out of a very narrowly focused job, parking attendant sitting in a booth. Now, they have customer service skills, or they wouldn't still be in the booth. They'd have been fired. So they have customer service skills, but you're taking them and giving them the opportunity to move into a bigger role. I've never felt like, after I got over the initial shock of this, I've never really felt like that I was damaging people's lives. I really felt like I was improving their life, giving them the opportunity to move to a bigger position. Now that I've looked at this process happening throughout the last 20 technology years, it's true. It's just absolutely true. And so you're not really taking people's jobs. You're really kind of nudging them to some degree to a job that's more important for us and for them. So I got over that pretty quickly. So now I'll tell you my story.
Okay.
This was when I was putting in the very first, not Focus Point, but Flow Through location, which was the first stage of removing the parking ticket. So I was kind of doing it, after 10 years of Focus Point, which got rid of people. So I was kind of doing the same thing So at the location that we put in, the very first focus point location was a location in Washington, D.C. So we go in to do this, and this location is being operated exactly like parking had been operated forever. It was a parking attendant in a booth. It was a ticket machine that was 20 years old and hardly worked anymore. And so we were ripping all of that out and putting in flow through that obviously didn't need people and was a much more streamlined operation. So this older woman drove in one day, and I was standing there watching as we're getting ready to have a full live operation. And she stops her car, rolls down the window, and starts yelling at me. You're the one that has taken all of these people out of jobs. It's you. Your fault. You are eliminating the jobs of all these poor people. And I just kind of didn't know what to do. And I remember this. I just kind of said, ma'am, they'll all have jobs. No, they won't. You're doing it. Right. So it's about 3 months later, and I have a customer that is one of my old focus point customers that wants to see this new technology because he just bought a new building in Dallas, the one that you were just at. He just bought a new building in Dallas. And he said, Clyde, you've talked about this. I want to see it because I think I want to put it in there. So I go, great. So meet me in Washington, D.C. So we're there. We're watching it. He's kind of, loving this. He says, oh, this is great. I want to put this in. And we're standing there by the island. And in the back of my mind, it's funny. I know she's coming. I know it.
You planned that. You went when she was going to work.
And sure enough, here she drives in, and she stops traffic, rolls down her window, and starts yelling at me. And of course, I'm with a customer who knows me now for 10 plus years. And he just thought it was fun. But she never would stop. I mean, she just kept yelling at me. I was a horrible person, and I was destroying these people's lives and taking all these jobs. So anyway, no, I'm a full believer that it's really just a streamlining effect of moving forward. You can't move forward if you don't look at these things, but you also have to realize that all they're doing is moving them to a higher level job that will be better for them in the future. So I got over that pretty quickly. And that I really felt like that getting them, who wants to sit in a parking booth for 40 years?
Yeah. Well, if I'm thinking about the same location that your story's about, isn't it the same people that are still working there today?
Yes.
They just manage it in a different way.
That's a great point. And that was in 2015.
Yeah. So 10 years later, we have the same contact at that location, and
we do.
They just play a different role. They just serve in a different way than what their position looked like before. And maybe their title didn't change, but their job responsibilities did change, and their free time, per se, to commit to the customers that are driving in or the customers that do experience a problem. They are more able and capable to give them the service and the attention that they need in a customer service industry.
That's a great point, because what we did was we took them out of this confined little booth.
Yep.
And move them out to the garage. This garage fills up almost every day. Moves them out to the garage, and you see them when you're standing there. You see them. They're very customer service oriented. So when they see somebody that's parked their car and is walking, looking for the elevator, they'll run to them and say, the stairs and the elevator are right over there. You can see it. Or when you see a customer drive in and then stop to say, where do I park? What do I need to do? And they'll run out to them. They're very excited to be able to get out there and help them, and run to them and say, right over there, I'll walk over there and help you. There's a spot right over there. And so it just changes, and it opens up the real true nature of the people that work in our industry, and lets them have a much better communication with the customer. So it really improves our service level. So it was difficult for me in the beginning, but in the reality, once I watched it, it's never been a problem for me to create products that take people out of a parking booth or change their job from this job in parking to really this job over here.
That is better for the parkers.
It's better for the parkers and it's better for them as an employee.
And the client. The client
Sure.
will have happier building tenants, and
Right.
just the trickle-down effect is huge for that concept in general. So,
right. Well, let me make one more point. Back in that early day of the development of Focus Point, which was really designed to eliminate those positions, I would get asked all the time, and I had to learn how to answer this question politely. But they would say, well, if you take the person out of the parking booth, that's security. There's nobody looking out. And I would say, they're sitting in a damn parking booth at the exit looking at the street. They don't ever see what's happening behind them.
mm-hmm.
So they're not security. Why do you think they're security? They're not. We're getting them out of the booth. Now they're security.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're able to walk around, take a look, go over and check the trash at the elevator plazas to be sure they're clear. They look more mobile through the garage, so they're more of a deterrent than they are sitting there in a booth. I don't think one single thief ever really worried about the parking attendant sitting in the booth. But now that the parking attendant's mobile, I think they have a bigger reason to be concerned about. So sorry, but I want to make that point.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. But what I'm hearing you say from your story is that at 8:30, we need to go be at the DC location and see if that lady pulls up and see what her take is now 10 years later, to see if she still yells at you.
Well, she was a government employee.
Mm-hmm.
So she hasn't been to work now in 4 or 5 years. But she's probably having to come back to work now or she's going to lose her job. So good. So she'll be there. So yeah, so let's do that. Next time we're there at 8:30, I'll go stand there and see if she still has her job.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because all the attendants do still have their job.
All of a sudden now I'm worried about her.
We'll have to follow up. We'll do a Where Are They Now study.
Yes.
All right. Well, this has been a great conversation, talking about just reflecting on our conversation with Barnacle and talking about the new technologies in the industry and the impact that they have and how it can be applied not only to tangible things like parking enforcement tools, but also to the operations of a facility and to propel them to the future. So thank you for joining us here on Our Parking Industry, and we look forward to talking to you next time. Bye-bye.
To quote one of the greatest business minds of our time, Charles Munger, he said, "The best thing a human can do is help another human being know more." Here on Our Parking Industry podcast, we want to provide knowledge and resources. If you heard something that sparked your curiosity in today's episode, please reach out on our socials at TPN Consulting. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. See you next time on Our Parking Industry.